Alright, I think we're about ready to get started. I got 5 people watching now. Alright, so welcome to kind of a new format. I've done stuff like this before, particularly with podcasts. But today we are going to talk about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers Endgame has been out for about a week now, and it's already the second highest grossing movie in the world. So, I think most people who are interested in seeing it have seen it, so I'm free to talk about it. But this is something I've wanted to do for a while, and that's rank the movies of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And let me just pull something up. Check in. Alright, so it's been about 11 years since the Marvel Cinematic Universe started. And Ashbarian and Alchemore are both in the chat now. So I want to do a little bit of house cleaning first. We were going to do podcasts on all these movies, but there were some scheduling conflicts with some of the podcastees. Didn't want to do it without them. And then those podcasts ended up, the ones that we did do, didn't end up getting a lot of views. I think they have like a total 300 views, the two of them that we do have. So I thought like maybe it would be better to just do it in this format. If you want actual podcasts on them, willing to still do that, willing to get their input, but I'm going to put like most of my thoughts on the Marvel Cinematic Universe's movies here. But I still encourage you to check those out because, you know, I'm one person and those podcasts have more than one person. So if you want like high-powered or dude what the heck's opinions on phase 1 of Marvel basically, then check those out. Another thing, I'm sure some people are wondering where I've been. I have not been active on YouTube very much. I've actually been more active over on Fat Man Falling's channel, joining in on live streams on his channel. I just haven't been in the mood to write scripts or record videos or live stream or anything like that for the last few weeks now. I am working on the next One Piece video. I recently finished rereading the Syrup Village arc. It's a drag, so I'll have that video out in the next few days. Also, I'm gonna go ahead and show myself out here before we get into the meat of things. Support my Patreon, donate in the Super Chat, every little bit helps. YouTube's algorithm has been screwing me and pretty much every content creator I know over. So, yeah, all that helps. So then, there are 22, right? Yeah, 22 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies now over the course of 11 years. That's an average of 2 per year. Even though there was one year that there weren't any, and there's been a couple where there's been like 4 movies. So number 22, at the very bottom, I have Thor: The Dark World. This is the one I think is the most agreeable in its badness. Like, pretty much everybody has either this or Iron Man 2 at the bottom of the list, and for good reason. Now, as I've said in a couple different videos, I'm a huge Thor fan. I'm a huge fan of the comics, especially the original Jack Kirby and Stan Lee stuff. And across the 3 standalone Thor movies we've gotten, I have not been very satisfied with any of them. And Thor the Dark World, by far the worst, and also the only one that kind of gets the plot right. Like, between the 3 Thor movies, there's a perfect Thor movie somewhere in there. Now, first movie, I think had the characters right. Second movie, I think has the plot right. And the third movie has the tone right. So take, like, the plot of Thor the Dark World, the characters from the first movie, and the tone of Ragnarok, and you have a perfect Jack Kirby era Thor movie. The bread and butter of the MCU has been its cast and characters, and this movie does a pretty good job at that. I really like Rene Russo as Freya. Anthony Hopkins is always great as Odin. Chris Hemsworth, I think, was a little bored in this movie, and as well as Age of Ultron, I really do believe him when he says that he was kind of getting bored with Thor until Taika Waititi completely reworked his character for Ragnarok. Natalie Portman just seems to phone it in on this movie. Idris Elba has a good moment. Christopher Eccleston completely wasted as Malekith. He is probably the weakest villain in the entire MCU, and he gets totally overshadowed by Loki, who is basically shoehorned in because of popular demand. But the plot in this movie, like I said, it's pretty typical Silver Age Thor stuff. You know, that Dark Elf tries to get Magic Rock to create the Dark World. It brings in the Reality Stone. It gets pretty recontextualized a little bit, or I wouldn't say recontextualized. It becomes a lot more relevant in Endgame. I really appreciate that. They don't just ignore the events of this movie and that they actually do bring it all back later on. Kudos to the Russo brothers for doing that. One of the few, I don't know who directed this. I think it was a pair of people that directed Thor the Dark World. I think they also worked on Game of Thrones, which is also going on right now. Yeah, I get what they were going with with Malekith. He's someone he feels cheated out of his home. He lost like the war against Odin's father or whatever, and he just wants his home back. But from what I've heard, they cut out a lot of his scenes, and so he kind of falls into the background of a movie he should be dominating. And Christopher Eccleston is the kind of actor that can dominate the screen, but he's completely unrecognizable in this role in a bad way. Unrecognizable in a bad way. They got somebody trying to be like freaking Curse, and that's just. Curse is one of the cooler Thor villains, and he's just a big muscle dude in this, and it's very disappointing to see that happen. And same thing with the Warriors 3, are completely wasted across this entire trilogy. In the comics and stuff, they are kind of like Thor's family and team and help him fight a lot, and in these movies they're just kind of wasted. They get a lot more to do here than they did in, well, especially Ragnarok, where they basically just all get killed off. But that's just another example of how this movie kind of gets the plot right, but it takes itself way too seriously. It tries going for that like dark and gritty Warner Brothers aesthetic, and it just does not work. I give it like a 5 out of 10. There's still a lot of good things in it. Creative action, especially at the end where they're like going in and out of portals. But overall, definitely the weakest Marvel movie. Next, Number 21. Uh, Possibly a controversial pick. It's the one I've seen the most recently. Captain Marvel. Um, on the whole, it might be a better movie than some of the older ones like Iron Man 2, but at this point, there's kind of like no excuse for mediocrity. Um, because you can kind of write off a lot of the older ones, Phase 1 and even Phase 2 to a certain extent, as them like trying to find their footing and trying to develop this cinematic universe, something that hasn't been done to this scale before. And Captain Marvel was just a backslide in every single way. Uh, I do like Brie Larson. I don't like her in this role. She. I think it's a direct. I don't know if it's a direction thing because she's kind of bad in Endgame too. It might just be. It might be Kevin Feige's fault. It might be. They marketed her as like, oh, she's the strongest Avenger, and then they had to just like double down on that, and they don't give her any of the like human vulnerabilities that makes Marvel so interesting. Um, the plot is kind of a mess. I'm having trouble like recalling. I've only seen this movie once, and I haven't really thought about it since. Um, I know they do. It kind of screws with the timeline a little bit, but the timeline in Marvel was never like hard and fast. There was always like it was always flexible, kind of like it is in the comics, where the timeline in the comics they never like have specific dates. So just an example, you had the Kang the Conqueror storyline that when I was a kid in the early 2000s that I read. One of my favorite Avengers storylines, like the Kang Dynasty. A couple years later, there's a story that called back to that, and they're like, oh, when did that happen? Oh, just a few years ago. They never give a specific date. I think the movies are kind of written that way, but then they try to shoehorn in actual years, and it just doesn't work. For instance, like in Avengers, Samuel Jackson, or yeah, I can't remember who it is, like asks Nick Fury, like why they need to use the Tesseract to make weapons, and he points to Thor as like it's because of him. But then you get this movie which takes place before any of that, back in the 90s, and now it's the Avengers initiative is because of the Kree and the Skrulls, not because of the Asgardians, like it was when we were first told about it back in the first Avengers movie. Um, and it shows that like, yeah, they don't plan these things out. That's a given. That's you know, not a secret. They're very open about like what they do by the seat of their pants, and each subsequent writer kind of like takes that and tries to work with it, which is exactly how comic books were written for. Well, always actually they're still written that way. Uh, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The same thing goes with manga, by the way. Like I know a lot of people are like, oh, Oda, he plans out One Piece so perfectly. Like no, he just kind of looks back at what he has and does stuff with it. Like that's anyone who tells you that they plan everything out perfectly the first time is lying. I try to plan a lot of things out, but in my own writing, I try planning a lot of things out. It always changes by the time I'm in the drafting stage. Like I'm working on a short story right now. That's actually what I've been working on a lot more than my YouTube stuff is my writing stuff. I'm working on a short story right now, and just in the couple weeks I've been working on that, it has changed so much from my original conception of the idea. Uh, but yeah, Captain Marvel, she's kind of a robot in this. The villain is all right. Samuel Jackson's Nick Fury character gets a lot of cool little moments. I do kind of like the buddy cop aspect of this movie. And I do like that they kind of validate her position as the strongest Avenger by basically making her binary. For those of you who don't know, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers has had a lot of different names throughout the years. One of them was binary, and that was her like at her strongest. That was when she had like the power of a supernova and was like punching holes through planets and stuff. And that's basically the version of Captain Marvel we got. It's that version of Captain Marvel, but with the modern day Captain Marvel suit. Even though I prefer Warbird, but that goes back to like my love of early 2000s Avengers comics that I grew up with, like the Kang Dynasty, where Warbird slash Carol Danvers played a very important role, and that's the Captain Marvel slash Miss Marvel slash Warbird slash Carol Danvers that I like. She's nowhere in any of these movies, and just gonna mention a bit of her role in Endgame. The main problem is that she has no chemistry with any of the characters. She's a great actress on her own. If you ever see the movie Room, where it's basically just her and this kid for the entire movie, she's phenomenal in that. She doesn't have any chemistry with any of the other cast. She had a little bit with Samuel L. Jackson, but Samuel L. Jackson is one of those actors who he'll have chemistry with an actual wooden plank. Like he could just be sitting there talking to a chair, and it's the most intelligent conversation you could ever have with the chair. That's just the kind of actor he is. That's why he's one of the most successful actors of all time. And he really elevates this movie. He's the reason why this movie is better than Thor: The Dark World. And he's also the reason why the next movie is higher than this. You guys probably know what's coming. Also, I know a lot of the Kree stuff gets wasted, like Ronan the Accuser and Jaimin Hansu's character from Guardians of the Galaxy is in this, and he gets wasted. It's That's the thing. It's kind of a way. I don't think this was a necessary movie. I saw Endgame first. Captain Marvel is probably the most skippable Marvel movie. Like this or Hulk. Either this or The Incredible Hulk are the two most skippable Marvel movies. You don't need to see them at all. Uh, gonna take a moment to read the chat. Yeah, Kieran Porter, Captain Marvel is the lost Phase 1 film, which is not a good thing. Yeah, a lot of Phase 1 movies do not hold up. Alcamore said what they did to Fury's Eye, and that, yeah, that was bad. That was dumb. Now, granted, we never knew what happened to Fury's Eye. It was sort of maybe kind of implied in Winter Soldier that it had something to do with Pierce, but that was always subjecture on the audience's part. It actually makes it humorous in hindsight. I actually kind of like it in thinking about it. Like, it's just so dumb, but in a funny kind of way. And that's something I've noticed about like the weaker Marvel movies, the ones that like don't have as much character or plot. They do tend to make up for it with jokes, and Captain Marvel does have some really offbeat humor. I'd like to see them make another Fantastic Four movie. Incredible Hulk is almost non-existent. Yeah. Alright, so next. Of course, Iron Man 2. This is the other one that everyone always puts at the bottom, and for good reason. We already talked about this on the podcast, but it really doesn't hold up. Don Cheadle, much better as Rhodey than Terrence Howard was. Samuel L. Jackson gets a few good moments in here. Robert Downey Jr. is great as Iron Man. He's great in all these movies. That's really all this movie has going for it. Mickey Rourke as Whiplash, also just kind of dumb. Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, accurate to the comics, still not interesting. Scarlett Johansson, rip. Uh, she's awful in this movie. I never liked Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. Um, I think she did get better, progressively better and better with each movie, but she's awful in this. She's barely passable in Avengers. She's decent in Winter Soldier. She's good in Civil War. Uh, she's not given a lot to do in Infinity War, and then she's really good in Endgame. Like Endgame is the one time that I'll be like, no, she's actually like beyond passable. Um, yeah, the rest of this movie, this is definitely the sophomore blues of Phase One. The time where people were like, is this whole cinematic universe a good thing? This guy, remember, this was only the third movie. We only had like one Iron Man movie and then a Hulk movie that everyone had already forgotten about by the time this came out. And this, I could see how people were like a little weary about this. And then the next couple movies ended up being much better. Um, but yeah, there's really not much to say about this. The action is kind of good towards the end. The final shootout with like all the robots is interesting. The final battle with Whiplash is not. The whole daddy issues thing handled a lot better in future movies, and same thing with the whole like Senate hearing thing, where they're trying to take Iron Man's suit and develop rivals. Like that's everything about this movie is done a lot better in Winter Soldier, Civil War, Endgame, and other like subsequent Iron Man movies like Iron Man 3. And that brings us to number 19, which is the first Thor movie. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the comics, not a fan of the movie. We already talked about this on the podcast as well. Audio cutting out. I'm not dropping any frames, so my internet seems to be doing all right. Ash Baron. What was there a writer strike back then? Huh. I think there was. Wow. I completely forgot about that. That might actually be it. Because there was a 2 year gap between the first and second Iron Man movies. Um, damn. Anyway, so Thor, it got the characters right. Every single bit of casting for the Asgardian characters is great. Natalie Portman phones it in, and that's actually kind of sad. Um, but man, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, they managed. That was a coup. That was a coup and a half. Discovering those two actors, who were completely like unknown at the time. Then you got some more like proven veterans like Anthony Hopkins and Rene Russo in there, Idris Elba, who was really good in Luther before this. Um, yeah. The main problem with this, I think, was a budgetary thing, where you have this very creative world with Asgard, and then you don't use it. This was the same problem that hit the Masters of the Universe movie back in the late 80s, or whenever that was. Where, yeah, we have this like really creative fantasy setting, but we're on a medium budget, so let's just film in the fucking desert for most of the movie. It was just a very boring, droll movie. Yeah, it had a lot of character. It had a really good character arc for Thor, learning to be worthy, learning what it means to wield that kind of power. Um, and while we're on this, by the way, no, spoilers for Endgame are going to be throughout this whole thing because Endgame ties up all these plot lines so excellently. Uh, I think there's a little bit of confusion on the nature of Mjolnir versus the nature of Stormbreaker. Mjolnir contains the power of Thor. It has like his essence. It has all of his power inside of it. Uh, like he whoever wields this hammer, if he be worthy, shall have the power of Thor. Um, so you have to be worthy to wield it, but anyone who is worthy can have like the lightning powers, can have all the same special abilities that Thor has naturally. Stormbreaker is just a powerful axe that amplifies Thor's power. Where like Mjolnir was there to help Thor learn how to control his godly powers, Stormbreaker is there to completely unleash it. And I bring that up because Mjolnir comes back into play in Endgame through time travel, and Captain America wields it. And when he wields it, he uses lightning powers. And I saw some people that were confused about like, how does Captain America use lightning powers if he's not Thor? Isn't that supposed to be like Thor's thing? Uh, yeah, the action in this movie, I think the action in this movie kind of sucks. The final battle against the Destroyer is pretty boring. The battle against the Frost Giants has a couple cool moments in it where, like, Thor throws his hammer. I think this does have some of the weakest action. Has the weakest action of Phase One. Um, no, bringing in other movies from other eras of the MCU might not have the weakest action, but certainly of the movies from like Iron Man to the first Avengers movie, this has the weakest action, and that really brings it down. I give it like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10 if I'm feeling really generous, because Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth do really knock it out of the park in their performances, and MCU lives and dies off its characters, which therein lives and dies off the actors. And so a lot of the scores for these movies are in proportion to how much the actors just bring it. And Tom Hiddleston, especially in this movie, really does bring it. Let's read some more of the chat. Da, 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 da. I don't think Natalie Portman killed the Thor franchise. She certainly was not good in it though. Thor Ragnarok is the third best movie. I disagree. Ragnarok was 2009, 2010, so that would have. I mean, that would have affected Green Lantern, maybe X-Men Origins Wolverine. Dragon Ball Evolution came out in 2008, so it did not affect Dragon Ball Evolution. Uh, so the next movie on the list is The Forgotten One, The Incredible Hulk. This was actually the first one I saw. I saw it in theaters. I already shared the story on the podcast. It was my birthday in 2008, and I saw this movie. Got to that post-credit scene with Robert Downey Jr. And my mom was like, "Okay, let's watch Iron Man now. Now that the whole like, oh, they're all going to be connected thing was real." Um, I think this movie is kind of underrated, but at the same time, everyone says it's underrated, therefore I think it's actually rated very fairly. I think it's underappreciated, is the thing. A lot of people just don't address this movie or talk about it. I think it's possibly the best we're going to get from a standalone Hulk movie, especially with how Universal's getting all kind of like. I don't understand why Marvel isn't trying to get the rights back from Universal. For those of you who don't know, Universal still has the solo Hulk movie rights, which is why Hulk has not appeared in his own movie. He's only appeared in like other people's movies, like in Thor Ragnarok or the Avengers movies. Um, Edward Norton does a really good job. I think Mark Ruffalo does do a better job, particularly because Mark Ruffalo is not afraid to play up both sides, whereas Ed Norton was very much just pigeonholed into Bruce Banner. He's a great actor. He's one of my favorite actors. Um, he's the only actor I really like in this movie, which is kind of a shame because this movie does have some other really good actors like Tim Roth and William Hurt. Um, and the action is pretty good. I really like the monster fight at the end, between Hulk and Abomination. I really like how this really is about Bruce Banner seeing a dark part of himself and realizing that he can use it for good. That the Hulk can really be used as a hero, not just a destructive monster. I really like how this movie blends, the monster movie aspects with the government conspiracy aspects, and they tie it in with Captain America with the super soldier serum, and then they kind of, yeah. I just I do think this is about as good as we're gonna get from a Hulk movie, at least from a story standpoint. There might be like a Hulk movie similar to this that has better CGI or better action, better directing, better dialogue. Uh, but I think as far as just the theoretical framework that this movie inhabits is absolutely perfect for the Hulk. You can definitely see a lot of inspiration from the very, very popular 80s TV show with Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno. As well as, like, elements from various comic book storylines. Even a couple aspects from the 2003 Hulk movie, which I have fond memories of. I'm very fond of the movie. I understand that it's not that good, but I've always really liked it. Uh, so yeah, a, a lot of these elements do make it a little bit of a mess, but it's a beautiful mess, and I think this movie underappreciated, maybe not underrated. No, you look at the Rotten Tomato score or whatever, and I think it was treated very fairly when it came out, and it's still treated very fairly by the people who remember it. Like I don't know anyone who says like that this is one of the bad ones, like they do with Iron Man 2 or Thor: The Dark World. Uh, it is one of the weaker ones though, and that's why it's this low on the list. So now number 17, another one that is controversial and skippable and doesn't tie in together with the other movies much, which is a shame because this was the follow up to the Avengers, so you'd expect a little bit more of that like Universal like crossover stuff going on in this, which we ended up getting with Captain America: The Winter Soldier, later on, like a year later. Uh, Yeah. And then, oh boy, everyone is great in this movie. Robert Downey Jr. gives a great performance. All the returning cast members give a great performance. I really like Guy Pearce as Aldrich Killian. I think he was a very good foil for Tony Stark. I really like that this movie got back to basis of like, okay, Tony Stark, he really just had this traumatic experience, uh, with the Chitauri during the Avengers. He's dealing with that. He's dealing with like what is Iron Man's purpose in the wider universe now. Because before that, he was kind of always Iron Man for himself. You know, he was Iron Man, and Iron Man wanted to get rid of his weapons that he had helped create. In Iron Man 2, he's Iron Man to protect himself and protect his intellectual property from the government, from Justin Hammer, and from Whiplash. Iron Man 3 is Iron Man, and this is the one where he really takes what he saw in the Avengers and becomes a real hero with it. And I gotta admire it for that. And we got to talk about the Mandarin. Um, and uh, where do we even begin with the Mandarin? Because I actually like the plot twist. I think it was a very good like bait and switch that was actually funny, and they actually did set it up at the beginning. No, Securage, his inciting incident was in the Avengers, not in Iron Man 3. Just saying that. Um, and even more so, actually, in Age of Ultron. Like, there's really no progression in Tony's plot in Iron Man 3. Uh, the Mandarin in the comics is an inherently. I hesitate to say racist because he's actually really awesome. But even though he's the best Iron Man villain, he's the best of a bad bunch. And I was never that big of a fan of him in the comics. I do think he was kind of cool with his ring powers. But I think that's just a little more crazy than Shane Black was willing to go in this movie. And it was a lot more grounded approach to have him just be a terrorist, but then also be like the face of a different villain, Aldrich Killian. Um, I don't think there was any winning. I don't think what they did was the best. Uh, Secure, you're saying that he blew up his suits, but then at the beginning of Age of Ultron, he has all the army of suits back, with the Iron Legion. Yeah, Iron Man 3 does not tie in together with a lot of things. Um, they even make a joke about that during the post credit scene, uh, where he in the post credit scene he's like talking to Bruce Banner. And Bruce Banner like falls asleep listening to the story. Uh, I do like the action in this movie. They don't really do anything with Pepper Potts later on. Like they do give her an Iron Man suit in Endgame. Um, and they don't, but they don't really address the fact that she had the extremis virus. Maybe she does. Maybe it worked its way out. Um, yeah, I do like this movie. I do think it's like a 7 out of 10. It's just as good as the Hulk. I know I have it above the Hulk, but it is dead like tied with the Hulk and my personal enjoyment level. Uh, I just I would have liked to see them try to do a more accurate portrayal of the Mandarin. I like what they did. I think it was entertaining, but we see these movies. Us fans of the comic books, which I'm not a fan of Iron Man in the comics. I've never liked him in the comics. I basically only enjoy him in the movies. But for those Iron Man fans who come, like, they want to see these characters on the big screen. They want to see them done justice. And the character we got in this movie was not the Mandarin. He was Mandarin in name only, and that's a little disappointing. It's different with like the Guardians of the Galaxy where they completely flesh them out and turn them into completely different characters, but still like awesome in their own right. Or still hilarious in their own right. It's if anyone who hates this movie because of what they did with Mandarin, not gonna argue with that. I know if they made Red Skull into this like cackling Skeletor-esque incompetent goofy actor villain, I'd be pretty pissed too. So those are my general thoughts on Iron Man 3. Ant-Man and the Wasp. Story-wise, this is the weakest of the Marvel movies. I think story-wise, this is even weaker than Thor the Dark World. Granted, the story was actually what I liked about Thor the Dark World. Story-wise, this is weaker than Iron Man 2. But it's really hilarious. They get really creative with the action. I love the action in the Ant-Man movies. And this movie does have a better villain than the first Ant-Man movie, which is kind of what puts it up so high up. I think they get a little too goofy with this. Ant-Man, I know, is a very inherently goofy character. The whole changing size gimmick and how that works is just, it makes absolutely no sense. It never made sense in the comics. It really doesn't make sense in the movies. Like, how come, he's got, like, normal Paul Rudd strength and his normal size, but when he shrunk down, he's like a freaking human-sized, a humanoid bullet that could like knock people out in a single punch. But when he's giant size, he can still like bench press and flip over trucks and stuff. And yeah, it never made sense in the comics. It really doesn't make sense here. It doesn't make sense. Like, a lot of things don't make sense in this movie, but don't think about it. Don't think about it just like you're not supposed to think about the time travel in Avengers Endgame or Doctor Strange. You're not supposed to think about the shrinking mechanics or the quantum realm stuff in this movie. So when you don't think about that, it's a lot of fun. It's got a lot of funny jokes, especially like the Paul Rudd getting stuck in like the grade schooler size, the midget size. That was hilarious. I really like Lawrence Fishburne as Ben Foster. I really like the villain, Ghost. I don't know who the actress is that plays her, but she's a really cool, interesting villain for Ant-Man. And I know a lot of people for some reason complain about Wasp being like a Mary Sue or whatever. Like, no, the whole joke in the first movie was that she was the competent one. Paul Rudd's Scott Lang character was just expendable. Like Michael Douglas as Hank Pym is actually a massive asshole. He's like, oh yeah, my daughter could easily do this, but if things go south, I don't want her getting hurt. You're just a criminal though, who has a daughter and really wants to like be a hero or whatever, but I don't really care about you, so you're the one who's going to be going on this dangerous mission. But again, this lives and dies off the cast and chemistry, and Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly have some fucking fire chemistry. They have better chemistry than I think any pairing in this entire cinematic universe, except for like, maybe some of the main cast guys like Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. I think have better chemistry. Mark Ruffalo has really great chemistry with everyone else. Same thing with Samuel L. Jackson. But as far as like the romantic pairings throughout these movies, Hope Van Dyne and Scott Lang are the top. tier. Um, and I really like how creative they get with this action. It's hard to describe, but like the Salt Shaker, the choreography with Evangeline Lilly's character, Hope. Um, One thing I did want to address with this movie, as we're getting into, in terms of how it ties in with Endgame, I really like that this is the movie that kind of set up the quantum realm and got some of the like really dumb stuff out of the way, so that in Endgame you could kind of just be along for the ride and not think about it very much. Um, and one thing I was a little disappointed with Endgame on, this is just a very, very minor nitpick. Because of what happens in Endgame, we will never see an original Avengers lineup. For those of you who don't know, in the comics when the Avengers first got together, it was Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Ant-Man, and Wasp. Captain America came later. But because Iron Man is dead, and him and Wasp never had screen time together, we'll never get Ant-Man, Wasp, Iron Man, Thor, and Hulk on screen together in this universe, and it's a little disappointing. I really wish that maybe it's in a deleted scene, maybe the Russos thought about that, but just cut it for time or whatever. Whatever the case may be, I really wish Endgame would have just had just one scene where those characters are lined up together. That I would have left the theater even more satisfied than I already was with Endgame. Uh, so next on the list is the first Ant-Man. Just as good as its sequel. It's a lot tighter film. I really like heist films. I really like how this movie blends superhero and heist films with kind of like almost this anti-hero. Like, yeah, he's doing something for a very, very good reason because Corey Stoll's character, who's Yellow Jacket, I don't even remember his actual name. I just know he's Yellow Jacket for some reason. He's like a pretty bad dude, and he's working for Hydra, wanting to sell Hank Pym's Ant-Man suit to Hydra, and Scott Lang is brought on board by the Pym family to take him down, steal the suit. Um, but stealing someone's legal property is still illegal, even if you're Robin Hood. And I really like that angle of it. It really raises the stakes, especially since he's already on thin ice because of previous burglaries or whatever. Uh, and Paul Rudd does such a good job in this movie. I've always liked Scott Lang's Ant-Man more than Hank Pym's Ant-Man in the comics. Uh, just by a smidge. I don't like any version of Ant-Man in the comics. But Scott Lang is a lot better than Hank Pym, so I'm glad that that's the direction they went with. I'm glad that they made Hank Pym the old mentor to keep him on board, to keep him as part of the cast, and Michael Douglas is perfect. The CGI on the flashback, whew, that technology has really come a long way in such a short time, from like when they were trying to do stuff like that in like 2010 or whatever to 2015 when this movie came out. It's even only gotten further with the Michael Douglas that they have in game. When Cap goes back to the 70s. Uh, and that train set fight is probably the most creative fight in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Uh, just on a conceptual level. Uh, the reason why this isn't higher is because of Yellow Jacket. He's right down there with Malekith as one of the lamest Marvel Cinematic Universe villains. Uh, yeah, I really like Evangeline Lilly. I really like Michael Douglas in this movie. Uh, but yeah, the whole like crime aspect really raises the stakes. Like, this isn't just a job. This isn't just like, oh, we can't let Hydra get their hands on this technology. It's like, no, if this fucks up, Ant-Man loses everything. He's putting his entire life on the line here. Not just like his life, but like his life with his family, which is everything to him. Uh, and I really like that angle, and it really made me appreciate this film, even if it is literally the smallest Marvel movie. I think it's like the second lowest grossing Marvel movie, right above Hulk. Um, and aside from being like an introduction to Ant Man, it doesn't really add much to the cinematic universe. But Ant Man is an absolute joy. I've enjoyed every single scene he's been in since then. I enjoyed his part. I loved his part in Civil War. I loved his part in Endgame. He stole that movie for me, at least in the first half. Like he was the hero of that film. Uh, crawling up Thanos' asshole and expanding and all. Had to mention that meme at least once today. Ooh, and next is what number are we on? 14. Controversial pick. Number 14 is Black Panther, the most overrated Marvel movie. Still good. Still better than the Ant-Man movies or the Thor sequels or a lot of things, but let's address the good first. The practical stuff is excellent. In this day and age, it's really important for these standalone Marvel movies to look distinct, to be unlike anything we had seen before. Especially as like Fox and Warner Brothers have been coming out with movies as well. Yeah, and you also get like Into the Spider Verse in the animation category. Uh, it's really important to like try to not look like a superhero movie, and this takes that Afrofuturism feel to a whole new level that we had never seen before, and it's all of that stuff is great. Um, Chadwick Boseman, great as Black Panther. I liked him better in Civil War. I liked him better in other movies. I think he's at his worst here, but I think it's not the actor's fault. It's not the director's fault either. It's the script's fault. So it is actually the director's fault because he also wrote the movie. Um, Black Panther's just not given a lot to do in his own movie. He's actually given more to do. He has a bigger role in Civil War than he does in his own movie. He's kind of a background player in this. The real star of the show is Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. He's the one who gets all the screen time. He's the one who gets all the scenes. He's the one who gets the character development. Chadwick Boseman just like stands there all stoically and then has the occasional speech and then comes to the decision at the end. I think Lupita Nyong'o is a fantastic actress. She's kind of wasted in here as Nakia or whatever the love interest name is. Um, I also don't like Shuri. I don't like the she's the smartest person in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, she hasn't done anything more impressive than creating an arc reactor out of table scraps in a cave. Like, she has vibranium and thousands of years of advanced technology to toy around with. Iron Man had like some old missile parts from the 1980s to completely revolutionize the world with his arc reactor suit. Uh, Martin Freeman is great in this. I really like Andy Serkis as Claw. Um, but there are a lot of plot holes, not any more than there are in any of the other Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm not going to be like Mueller and pretend like this is somehow worse than every other Marvel movie just because it has plot holes. Though I do have to wonder if the director watched Civil War before writing this movie. Um, my thing is that the special effects suck. Like, this is a 2018 movie and a very high budget one at that. There's no excuse for the final fight between Black Panther and Killmonger to look worse than the CGI monster fight from the Hulk movie 10 years earlier. Uh, my other big complaint is, again, like Black Panther's role in this. He doesn't get a lot of screen time with Killmonger. This movie is set up. it actually handles the political themes very well and very honestly. Like, yeah, Killmonger is wrong, but we can't forget that Killmonger is the villain, and what he says, though not based in reality, it is what people like him think. No, they really do have that like woe is me. We back? Okay, I think we're back now. Let me refresh this. Yeah, okay. Now we're back. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. Killmonger. I was talking about Killmonger. I saw my internet disconnect, so I didn't say anything that you missed. Uh, uh, yeah, the most disappointing thing about this movie was that, Killmonger and T'Challa did not have as much interplay as I think they could have. I think there's a lot of fat in this movie that could have and should have been trimmed, shaved right off, and then replaced with like more of those over the top thematic debate. Take more pages from The Dark Knight. Like, there's reasons why everyone talks about like that interrogation scene with Batman and Joker, because like the more screen time you give like the villain and the hero to interact and really talk about like why they're doing this, why they're fighting, the better. I think. Uh, I really like when my superhero movies get like kind of soap opera esque or over the top dramatic, Shakespearean almost. That's what I liked about the first Thor movie, is that it was like that was the only thing it really had going for it. Um, yeah, so Black Panther, kind of a disappointment. 7 out of 10. Uh, Still really good though. Still had a lot of really good and interesting things. It's a very interesting movie. Very fair. I think the political stuff was handled very fair and honestly, and in a place that came from like the character's perspective rather than the director's perspective. I gotta give it props for that. So number 13, move that out of the way. The movie that actually handled the colonial themes better, Thor Ragnarok. The biggest problem with this movie is that the comedy is too uh, omnipresent. Every single time that this movie almost has something really good going on or something really interesting happen, they undercut it with the joke. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's completely inappropriately timed. Um, but once again, it's a very interesting movie, and I don't think enough people like really give it credit for Hela. Hela is a really great villain. I absolutely love Kate Blanchett. I'm totally biased for her. I'm also very biased for the Jack Kirbyisms, the like very cosmic, new age like acid trip visuals of this movie and the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And this movie does a really interesting thing that recontextualizes that first Thor movie. And I should have refilled my glass while I was disconnected, but I didn't. So now I have to refill it now because my voice. Um, anyway, so Hela comes from a time when Odin was younger and conquering, the nine realms. The little bits that we saw in the first Thor movie. That part of Odin that changed when he adopted Loki into his family. Uh, that Odin, the one that raised Hela, would have been proud of Loki and probably would have picked him over Thor. John Stinson. And anytime the stream disconnects, it's probably my fault. This is why I don't do streams very often. I can't trust my internet connection. It's actually been working very well today. Usually it's disconnected like 2 or 3 times by now instead of just the one time. Uh, but yeah, the the Odin that raised Hela would have been proud of Loki's plot from the first movie. Uh, and I think that that's a really interesting recontextualization of Odin. And a recontextualization of Thor because Phase 3 has a lot of disappointing father figures as a ever present theme, and Thor kind of goes on a similar character arc as Spider-Man does in Spider-Man: Homecoming, where he has to like accept the baggage of his past or of his father figure and be better. He has to be better than Odin ever was. And accept himself and his own stuff, not as the son of Odin, but as Thor, the god of thunder. Aside from that, Mark Ruffalo does a really great job as Hulk. I love that Mark Ruffalo is willing to actually like get in the paint, get in the mocap suit, and be the Hulk as well as Bruce Banner. Kate Blanchett is excellent. Jeff Goldblum is at his most Jeff Goldblumiest in this movie. I can't remember the actress's name, but Valkyrie is a lot of fun. I don't think she I don't think she really earned her position that she got at the end of Endgame, but at the same time, it's either her or Korg. Like, who else are they gonna, have run Asgard while Thor is off with the Guardians of the Galaxy? Like, honestly, she's fine. It's not like what they do with Captain America. The action is a lot of fun. The soundtrack's a lot of fun. And this whole movie is just a lot of fun. I can see why a lot of people love it. Even if I just kind of like it. I don't love any. I don't have this unending love for any of the movies I've talked about so far. I'll say when we cross that line, but it's not going to be for a couple more movies. We're still very much in the okay to kind of good section of the MCU rankings. But yeah, this movie really got the tone right. I really want to see more movies with this kind of fun energy about them. Take it a little more seriously. I think you can do both. Don't make it just completely comedy like this movie did. If this movie would have given those dramatic moments, like Asgard blowing up, time to breathe, this could have been in my top 3. That's how much I enjoyed what I did enjoy about this movie. The comedy really did kill it, though. In a bad way. Just, the comedy was awful, I think. And so, speaking of thing that people say is awful, next on the list, a lot of people don't like this movie, and I'm not sure why, but I also understand why. Avengers Age of Ultron, the second Avengers movie, the last movie Joss Whedon has made, without just being a pickup director for Zack Snyder. This has Joss Whedon's fingerprints, for the worse, all over it. There's a lot of bad. I think the main problem with there's 2 really, really big problems with this movie that keep it from being like the number 1 spot. Joss Whedon's not a good director. It all comes back on him. He's he got to start in TV. He's been a TV director for decades, since like the mid '90s. He, in that 20 years since Buffy the Vampire Slayer got big, he has not developed or matured. Yeah, he has not developed or matured as a director at all. Uh, and this movie, it feels like an entire season of a television show chopped down to the bare bones to be a 2.5 hour movie. And unlike something like Avatar The Last Airbender, which has the same problem, we don't have the full TV show to fall back on. This is all we're getting from Ultron. This is all we're getting from like this season of television is just this 2.5 hour highlight reel of it. But the good stuff is really good. In fact, this is still probably my favorite movie going experience because that highlight reel has some of my favorite moments in the entire MCU. Hulk punching Ultron, there are no strings on me. I'm gonna tear them apart from the inside. Ultron's introduction, the stuff with Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, you didn't see that coming. Aaron Taylor Johnson doing something a bit different with Quicksilver than what a lot of people are probably used to from him, or used to from Quicksilver, because Days of Future Past came out a year before this did. Elizabeth Olsen, bless her heart, she's a great actress. She's a great emotional actress. She doesn't have a lot of vocal range, and it shows. Her accent is awful in this, but her accent... YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience... so you're probably lagging. No, I mean, it's the same as it's been. Oh, no, it just dipped a bit. Oh, well, I'm not seeing any problems. Let me know in the chat if it's like lagging and you can't hear me or whatever. Yeah, this movie is just full of really great moments that don't really gel together because it's so hacked down to the bone. It's kind of hard to describe why I do like this movie. It seems like what I said, like, oh, it should be in the bottom parts. But I do think that the good far outweighs the bad, and that every single moment in this movie is a good moment. There just should have been more of it. It could have done with being a lot longer movie. I think this is the one that should have been 3 hours. Maybe even 3.5 hours to really let things air and let things like breathe. There's no breathing room in this movie. There's a lot of downtime, and that downtime is really good with like the after party scene. But even then, it's just like, this is the highlight. This is 2 minutes from a 20-minute episode of downtime. And I think there's just a lot holding this movie back. I can see why people hate it. I can see why people think it's awful. The directing is awful. The editing is awful. The CGI is okay. I do think this movie gets away a lot with the really quippy dialogue and what little downtime we do have, and the action. The action is really good. It's another one where the Avengers are just punching an army of gray henchmen, but they're punching them with a lot of freaking style, and I really appreciate the combos and stuff in this movie. Like, I think this is the one where like Cap throws the shield and then Thor hits the shield with the hammer to go in through like a bunch of bots. And anything with the Vision. Paul Bettany is just absolutely perfect as the Vision. They do a lot with Hawkeye in this movie. He gets like one of the best lines in the entire MCU with we're in a floating city, fighting a bunch of robots, and I'm using a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense. I absolutely love how they do that. Uh, so then we're getting closer to the ones that I think are legitimately good. Like even for people who aren't as invested in the whole superhero thing like I am. Doctor Strange is a very creative movie. It's one of those movies that I've actually taken a lot of inspiration from in my writing. Um, with the whole mirror world, the mirror realm or dimensional rift or whatever, and the way it uses the way it implements the time stone. Like I said with Black Panther, very important for these movies to start like standing on their own. Plot wise, this is very similar to Iron Man. Uh, and Doctor Strange is a very similar character to Tony Stark. He goes through a similar arc of like realizing that he's just being an asshole and needs to step up and be a good guy. But the look of this movie is unlike anything else. I described Thor Ragnarok as a Jack Kirby fever dream. This is a Steve Ditko fever dream, and I like Steve Ditko more than I like Jack Kirby. Um, there's some mind bending like visuals that freaking outpace the best of like Inception, and they just get really creative with the magic, and they use the training stuff very very well for world building. They really make you feel like I think this movie does a lot better at like teaching its magic than than fucking Harry Potter did throughout 8 movies. Like I never really bought the progress with Harry Potter or the school setting with Harry Potter, but I really bought that like Doctor Strange was studying and incarmatage and stuff for years, even though it turned out he wasn't. But that's timeline discrepancies. They're all over the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We'll get to the 8 years later thing pretty soon. uh, and yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch, he's perfect as Doctor Strange. Every single line he says has this level of gravitas that only Benedict Cumberbatch can bring to the screen. And it's just like you. I feel like all of my viewers are anime fans because that's what I tend to talk about with Ruby. Um, but you see this a lot in anime, where there will be like a unique way of fighting or something, and then people will like implement that. Like Naruto. Everyone does the Naruto run. Everyone has tried to do a Kamehameha. Everyone does the like the clap and then slam of Full Metal Alchemist. Uh, I do the same thing with this movie. I do the like the like those Steve Ditko finger breaking hand gestures to do like I do that like thinking about how magic in Doctor Strange works, and it's really cool when a movie or a TV show can really like strike something from a different angle and kind of inspire stuff. Like when I do my magic fantasy, a lot of it's going to be cribbed from how magic is portrayed in this movie, where you're just manipulating the energies of the world and manipulating the matter of your realm, not so much creating as you are taking energy from another universe to create. Um, uh, the reason why this movie isn't higher is once again the villain. I don't even remember the character's name. I just know he's Mads Mikkelsen. He's just kind of there. Dormammu is actually a lot more interesting, and he's defeated in a much more interesting way with Dormammu. I've come to bargain. Um, I'm really looking forward to Chiwetel Ejiofor as Baron Mordo. Um, he's given quite the character arc in this too. I like it when a movie can give dual character arcs like that, like because like Benedict Cumberbatch's Doctor Strange, he starts off as an asshole and becomes a hero. Chiwetel Ejiofor's Baron Mordo, who starts off a hero, but then through like the revelations and struggles of this movie, becomes the villain that will be in the next movie. Um, I like it when a movie can like parallel multiple characters like that. This movie does a really good job. The director of this, I think his name is like Sam Dickerson or what. He's the director of Sinister. He directed the first Sinister movie as well, and he's coming back for Doctor Strange too. He's becoming one of my favorite directors. He has not made a bad movie yet. Neither has the writer of this movie, who also worked on with him on Sinister, and was actually my favorite member of the Spill crew, Robert Cargyle, back when I first got into film criticism through Spill.com with Corey Coleman, Robert Carlyle, Cyrus, co-host 3000, and Martin Leon Thomas, who you can see two of them now on Double Toasted. I've never been in contact with them. I've never had like Senpai notice me, but they've always been my favorite critics. You can still find, the majority of them on Double Toasted, and one of them worked on this movie, and so it's it's almost like that Me Too factor that I've mentioned before about Ruby, where like a lot of Ruby's appeal was that, oh, I could do that, I could write that good, I could animate that good, I could be famous. There's a bit of that with this movie too, where like the guy who wrote this movie 10 years ago was like making fun of the Dark Knight on a stupid internet podcast show. Like that's how the time changes, it brings a smile to my face. Next, I think this is yep, this gets us into the top 10. Spider-Man Homecoming is a good enough movie. I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, but similar to Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther, I think he's better in other people's movies. He is not as interesting in his own movie as he was in Civil War or Infinity War. Or even Endgame, and he's only in Endgame for a few minutes. What puts this movie over the top is Michael Keaton as the Vulture. He is by far the best part of this movie. He brings like this very blue collar, like grounded, like he just wants to do right by his daughter, and kind of like get back at Tony Stark for ripping him off, which that's a very common theme in Iron Man movies is people like trying to get back at Iron Man. Like in the first one, it was Obadiah Stane trying to be like, "You're such a punk ass kid. I'm gonna teach you a lesson." Iron Man 2, Dimitri Vanko was like, your father ripped off my father. Now I kill you." Iron Man 3, Aldrich Killian was like, "You gypped me at a party once, and now I'm going to kill you." In this movie, Vulture's like, "Your company completely ruined my entire livelihood 8 years ago, even though it was actually only like 2 years ago, but timeline discrepancies, and oh boy, this one creates a lot." Kevin Feige needs to take over a lot more of Spider-Man's production, because this movie has a lot of timeline discrepancies that just like throw everything out of whack, and it's like they don't even know what they're doing. Uh, but yeah, I really like Spider-Man's dynamic with Iron Man. Any scene where they're interacting together is great. Any scene with Vulture in it is great. I just don't think Spider-Man himself gets a lot to do in this movie. He doesn't get a whole lot of character development. He basically is just like, no, he doesn't really change. He just kind of humbles himself a little bit. Towards the end, it's like, I don't need the suit. It does have some really good defining moments, but we've seen Spider-Man before. It's not like Iron Man or Captain America where we had never seen them on screen done justice before. We've seen Spider-Man done justice plenty of times. Spider-Man 1, 2, half of Spider-Man 3, a third of Amazing Spider-Man, and like a couple minutes out of Amazing Spider-Man 2. Not to mention Into the Spider-Verse, which came out after Spider-Man Homecoming, but still did Spider-Man justice a lot more than this movie did. I just don't think the Spider-Man struggles nearly as much as those other Spider-Man did. He kind of gets a free pass a lot of times. Like the only real consequence he gets is Iron Man taking his fancy suit away. And another one of the best scenes in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, the whole and what if someone died tonight? See, different story, because that's on you. And if something happened to you, I feel like that's on me. Robert Downey, that's my favorite Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man moment in the entire saga. It's not even in an Iron Man or Avengers movie. It's in this movie. And it really it comes back into play in Infinity War in a massive way, and it's so good. Yeah, I guess Spider-Man Home. I go back and forth on whether I like this more or Doctor Strange. Like right now, as I'm talking about it, I feel like I actually do like Doctor Strange more. Uh, but a lot of my negative reaction to this movie is in relation to those first two Sam Raimi movies, which I grew up on and are just better movies overall. Like in almost every single way, both of those movies are better than this one. Whereas Doctor Strange doesn't have anything to compare it to. The only thing I could really compare Doctor Strange to is like Harry Potter, which I'm not that big of a fan of. So it's always going to be seen positively in that light. Whereas this, it's really hard not to look at Spider-Man Homecoming in a negative light because of those older movies. Uh, and even with the best thing about this movie, Michael Keaton as the Vulture, Alfred Molina's Doc Ock was a lot more interesting and a lot better. So it's just, a no-win scenario for Marvel in that regard. I'm also not big on the side characters. I don't like MJ. I really don't like that it looks like they're trying to make her Mary Jane. It's... Ugh. She's... one of my least favorite type of people. Um... His friend is alright. Uh... Ned, I think, is his name. The one who's like, we're all going to die in Infinity War. Uh... Flash Thompson is alright in this movie as well. No, I am glad that, Spider-Man has always been kind of like a hip hero. Like, they always kind of retcon him to be in the modern day. And they do that here. So it's very much a 2017 version of, Queens, of New York, of, this character of this universe. And I dig it a lot, but with a lot of asterisks that keep me from being fully in love with this movie the way I am with Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2 being, top 5 superhero movies ever. And so next, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. A lot of people love this movie a lot more than I do. My main complaint is Ronan. I think he was kind of a wasted antagonist and the weakest villain. No, I was gonna say the weakest villain Phase 2 had, but Phase 2 also had Malekith in Thor: The Dark World. Has the same problem as Thor: Ragnarok, where the comedy undercuts the genuinely good dramatic moments that they could have done. I think the action is just kind of okay. It's got a lot of really good jokes, but a lot of jokes that fall flat. But once again, it's there was really nothing that looked like this movie when it came out. A lot of movies have tried to copy its feel since then, like Suicide Squad or its own sequel, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which I'll get to later. Um, but yeah, this. I haven't seen this movie in a while, so my memory on it is a little rusty. I'm not feeling any emotional connection to anything as I'm trying to think about it. Cast is good. I love Chris Pratt. Zoe Saldana is serviceable. Dave Bautista is really good in this movie. Like, I was actually very impressed with him. Bradley Cooper, I've always liked Bradley Cooper. He's great as Rocket. Vin Diesel, he really did say I am Groot like 70 different ways, and that's admirable. Lee Pace as Ronan, not as good. Jaimin Hansu as what's his face, the pursuer, not as good. Karen Gillian as Nova, a lot better in subsequent films. I think she's at her weakest here. She's still pretty interesting. She has a good little rivalry dynamic with Gamora that gets explored a bit in this movie, but it's explored a lot better in its sequel and in Endgame. Uh, Thanos kind of at his lamest here. He only gets a cameo. Um, some of the other side characters aren't very interesting. But the look and feel of this movie is very unique in the modern blockbuster landscape, and it remember like this came out before Star Wars came back. Like this was the first Star Wars feeling movie that we had gotten since Revenge of the Sith came out back in 2005. I do think this movie's success opened up the gate for The Force Awakens to be the record breaking movie that it ended up being a year later. It really tapped into like that nostalgic vein without being vacuous fan service like the Jurassic World movies are, or the Fantastic Beasts movies are for Harry Potter fans. Um, but yeah, I think just this is kind of a better version of Thor Ragnarok. It's not as obnoxious as Thor Ragnarok got a lot of times. The comedy is quite a bit better, and there are moments where it actually does like give time to breathe and stuff that Ragnarok did not have. But overall, it kind of suffers from all the same problems Ragnarok does still. The comedy, like, Dance Off Bro, just really undercuts the potential drama and action of the movie for the sake of a not terribly funny joke. And now we're crossing that threshold. From here on out, it's all movies I absolutely love. Starting with the first Captain America movie. Uh, I already talked about this on the podcast. I absolutely adore this movie. I adore Captain America. Full bias. Um, I'm a huge Captain America fanboy. Have been all my life. Um, this movie is exactly every single thing I could have wanted in a Captain America movie. This this is my dream Captain America movie, just made flesh. With that said, because of that, a lot of the things were predictable to me. Like I knew exactly where they were going with it before they even did. Um, but Chris Evans, boy, was I wrong when he first got cast. I was doubting him, and he proved me wrong within seconds. Within a second before his first second of screen time was up, he had me sold that he was Steve Rogers. And there will never be a Steve Rogers like him. This is like that Christopher Reeve Superman level casting. We will never, ever get a Captain America like Chris Evans again. He is the definitive version of the character. He takes all the best moments from all the best eras of Captain America into one contained, cohesive package. Um, it's the only way to have a Captain America movie this good is to just rip it off wholesale and just be exactly the same. And even then, it's like, then you're losing that originality of, I was the first to do that. And it's so good. Like, I'm actually, like, emotional thing about, like, how his story ended up and just how phenomenal he was throughout this entire experience. The last, like, almost 10 years of Captain America movies, because this first one came out in 2011, so it's been 8 years since he started. Um, but let's talk about some of the side casts. Sebastian Stan is so good as Bucky. Uh, he is like the luckiest bit of casting they've gotten, because he's kind of just a bit character in this. So that's maybe my one complaint that keeps it from being above the next 2 or 3 movies on the list, is that Bucky Barnes just kind of gets sidelined a lot. Um, Almost like they didn't want you to care too much about him, just in case you didn't know what they were going to do with him later. Uh, Haley Atwell is, whoo, whew, that those assets that she has as a actress. No, she's great. Tommy Lee Jones just kind of playing Tommy Lee Jones, but that's great. That's exactly what they needed. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull. They could have easily made him an over-the-top Skeletor, cackling, dumb villain, but they made him like really smart, sophisticated. They made him the perfect parallel for Captain America, because Captain America is just a really good dude. He gets the power and body that he deserves. Red Skull is just an evil, just bitter, hateful, tyrannical human being who has almost a god complex, and Captain America just defies explanation for him. Like Red Skull's like, finally a rival, someone like that I am equal to, someone who I could look eye to eye with, and not one of these worms. And Captain America's just like, I'm just a kid from Brooklyn, and then he loses his shit. Like, there's so much good heart in this movie. I understand why some people don't like it. I understand how people don't like the montages or the editing, but it is a love letter to the original comic book run by Stan Lee. It's a love letter to Captain America's role as, a piece of propaganda, as a superhero, as this like focal point for the heart and soul of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the heart and soul of Marvel Comics. And like I said, this is the best version of Captain America in any medium. He's better here, across these movies, not just in this movie, but across like Winter Soldier, um, across like this movie, Winter Soldier, Civil War, his appearances in the Avengers movies, all the way up through Endgame. This is the best version of the character, better than any of the comic book runs, better than any of the TV shows. Um, that's actually all better than the video games, but he's not in very many video games. Yeah, this is the Captain America movie, and I absolutely love it to bits. Very, very underrated. This movie is underrated. A lot of people love it. A lot of people put it like really high on their list. I have it like kind of an average spot, I think, overall. Um, but I cannot be friends with people who actually hate this movie. And even that, I understand where they're coming from. They're just wrong and aren't. They just don't get the point. All right, so I guess that brings me to number 7, right? Yeah, number 7. The first Iron Man movie, the movie that started it all. Much like Captain America and all the other Phase One movies, we have podcasts on these where we get a bit more in depth. Um, has some of the same problems that the first Thor movie does. The villain is kind of weak sauce. The action is that action sequence with like the tank missile and stuff is pretty good. The other two action scenes, not so much. Robert Downey Jr., great as Tony Stark, godsend. Um, he really brought his own, and he really cleaned up his act to play this movie and kind of carry the MCU for a bit. Uh, and then later on with help from like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth, and to a lesser extent maybe Mark Ruffalo and some of the other supporting casts, and then later on like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man. Gwyneth Paltrow's good as Pepper Potts. I'm just not a big Iron Man fan. I was never a big Iron Man fan in the comics. Um, didn't read a lot of his story. Didn't read hardly any of his storylines. Like I think I've read bits and pieces of Devil in a Bottle, and I think I read Extremis back in the day, which was one of the things that Iron Man 3 was based on. Um, so I wasn't ever very excited for this movie. I didn't see it until after I saw Hulk and saw that I was going to tie in. Um, this movie didn't really win me over in the comics, but I do really like Iron Man in these movies. Uh, and yeah, I really like the character arc they give him, and I really like the whole like I am Iron Man, which comes back in a big way in Endgame. It's the last words he says before the snap. That takes Thanos and his crew. I think he gets some like last words to Peter and Pepper after that, but everyone's gonna know him for like that. Thanos said like, "I am inevitable. I am Iron Man." Snap. Um. Yeah. Movie's just solid directing, solid pacing, solid comedy. Now this really did create the theoretical framework for the entire MCU. Um, maybe gets followed a little too closely sometimes. Uh, like with Ant-Man and Doctor Strange, I think they follow the Iron Man formula perhaps a little too much. And Thor had like this same problem with its final act, and the final action scene being like the worst part of the movie. But yeah, this is an 8 out of 10. It's a super solid movie. I just don't have much to say that hasn't been said dozens and dozens of times before. So then, number 6. Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I don't understand how anyone can think that this isn't better than the first one. Like I said, these movies live and die off their cast, they live and die off these characters, and this movie is all about character. We get so much characterization and character progression for every single member of the cast in a way we did not get in that first movie. We get Dave Bautista dealing with the loss of his family and accepting like the new family he has in the Guardians. We get that scene with Rocket and Yondu about like, I know you because you're me. I was just like you, kid. You get Yondu and Star Lord, Peter Quill's dynamic fleshed out. The like he may have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy. We get like the moment with Gamora and Nebula with the like, you just wanted to win and I just wanted a sister. It's just full of moments like that, and the villain is so much more interesting than Ronan, and he ties directly into Peter Quill's development. It got Kurt Russell. I always want to say Russell Crowe. It's Kurt Russell as Ego the Living Planet, who ties directly into Star Lord's past and just really pushes the Guardians to their limits, and at the same time pushes them closer together to where like they're not just a team, they're not just a ragtag group of idiots. They are a family. They are a family that they never got as a childhood because like Peter Quill never came to accept Yondu as like the father figure he so clearly was. Rocket didn't have a family. Groot is baby Groot. I do like that I don't think they ever make the the distinction in the movie, but I know James Gunn has went on record to be like, no, Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is not the same Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy 1. He is like Groot Jr. It really makes Groot's sacrifice in the first movie mean a lot more. And also leads to like baby Groot jokes, and that's just, he's just adorable. Um, yeah, this movie is just so much fun. It's got all the same fun and energy as the first Guardians movie, and does not fall into the same comedic pitfalls that movie did. It's a much better movie. It's a much more solid movie, and it's a much more like character centric movie that because the character is so much more important than what they do. Oh, the whys are much more important than the whats, and this movie is all about like the whys and hows for these characters rather than the whats. And when it comes down to the whats are a lot higher stakes than they were in the first movie. Like the first movie, like they had to save like Nova Prime at the end, had to keep the Power Stone away from, or get the Power Stone away from Ronan, and keep him from touching down, because if he touched down with the Power Stone, he could just nuke the entire planet. Whereas this, like, they're actually saving the entire galaxy by thwarting ego. Uh, yeah, I really don't understand why people are down on this movie the way they are. I know a lot of people love it. I know a lot of people who say it's their favorite movie and they put it above like everything else. Um, but in my experience, like the saying that this is a disappointment or a downgrade from the first movie seems to be the more common viewpoint, and it's just one I can't agree with. This movie is better in almost every single way for me. Everything that I look for in a movie and I look for in one of these standalone movies, this movie does a lot better than the first one. Let's do this here in a second. Just gonna let that sink in for a minute. Number 5 is Avengers Endgame. The conclusion of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I know it's not really the conclusion, Spider-Man Far From Home. I actually just had a trailer drop today. I watched it. Pretty interesting. But this really was the fitting conclusion to so much. It was a brilliant send off to Iron Man and Captain America, and a great like next step for Thor and Hulk, and a great like launching point for Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel, and Black Panther to kind of take over the rest of the cinematic universe from here. Uh, by process of elimination, it's not as good as Infinity War. I'll get to that later. But it is a brilliant send up of it. Um, there's a couple problems I have. I don't like Captain Marvel. Like I said, I don't think she has good chemistry with anyone in this movie. I know she's not in it a lot, but I didn't enjoy any of the bits that she was in. I also think the time travel gets pretty convoluted. Uh, Time travel is something I will never touch as a writer. I will do my absolute best to stay away from time travel for the rest of my life. And it doesn't really work here. There's a lot of like fast and loose rules that they don't even follow with that they set up and then don't follow through on. Uh, my other complaint, I'm glad Captain America got his send off. I'm glad he got his happy ending. I don't think Sam Wilson earned it. I don't think he earned it in the comics. I think that was an awful move in the comics as well. And I just for so long for the last like 10 years, I've thought that the movies have been better than the comics, and to see Kevin Feige and these directors and the Russo brothers be like, oh, we're gonna shoehorn in these bad things from the comics into this movie. I think it's just an all around bad move. Like trying to build it around Captain Marvel, someone that not very many people like. No, even the people who like her movie think she was like the worst part of that movie. People not liking her in Endgame, people don't like her in the comics. I think it's a big mistake to like cut her hair like that and then try to like build it around her with this really shoehorned in like gag worthy feminist shot that doesn't even really do anything because Captain Marvel has absolutely no relationship with any of these characters and just kind of bulldozes her way through without their help anyway. Like, I watched Nando V Movies. He's a really good channel. You should check him out if you're not checking him out already. He did a rewrite where, like, that scene was actually focused on Gamora and Nebula, and then Captain Marvel basically just, like, handled Thanos in that section. Like, still had, like, the lineup with all the female heroes, but then it's Nebula and Gamora that run the gauntlet while Captain Marvel holds off Thanos. I think that would have been a lot better. But so many send offs, so many like moments that had me like my jaw like quivering, particularly with Ant Man, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and Captain America. Like those four were really at the heart. Thor had a lot of really good moments too, especially when they go back to like the Thor: The Dark World section and he gets closure with his mother that he never got in those movies. Um, um, and yeah, that final battle at the end was just like they really threw everything in the kitchen sink. I just wish there was an original Avengers lineup just for a split second, just literally just one shot, and then they scattered. Like that would have been enough for me. Um, I think this was also like the last one Stan Lee did film the cameo for before he died. He might have also gotten in the Spider-Man Far From Home cameo before he died, but they haven't. I don't think they've said anything about that, which makes me believe that like they didn't. Um, but yeah, this movie really does deal with the fallout, and you really see the negative consequences of like the Avengers failing and failing hard. They failed hard in Infinity War, and it's shaken each and every single one of them to their core. Uh, I do like the general setup of the time travel. I like um that they're doing a time heist. They're taking the Infinity Stones from various parts of time, bring them back. Then they're gonna unsnap everyone and then send the stones back. I think that's really good. It's a good way to not like just completely undo Infinity War. Like Infinity War still happened. They're just fixing it. They're fixing what's broken instead of like preventing it from being broken in the first place. I think it could have gotten so much worse, so much more convoluted had they tried to go that route. Um, but they do end up screwing with the timeline, especially with Thanos jumping into the future. Um, and for that final battle, so many cool moments. Captain America finally being worthy and wielding Mjolnir. Um, the gauntlet thing with Black Panther, Spider Man, and then Captain Marvel. Because those three seem to be the three that they're really wanting to build the future around. Even though I think Doctor Strange is much more worthy of like the cosmic side than Captain Marvel, but that's just because I think Doctor Strange is a much better movie than Captain Marvel. Um, Nebula gets a lot of development in this movie, surprisingly enough. Um, Thanos isn't quite as interesting, but this isn't Thanos' movie the way Infinity War was. Infinity War was absolutely Thanos' movie. This is much more like Captain America, Iron Man, Hulk, and Thor's movie. Less so Hulk and Thor, more so Iron Man and Cap. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of like what else I should address. Oh, they brought in everyone too. Like Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One makes a brief appearance. The kid from Iron Man 3 shows up at the end for Tony Stark's funeral. Tony Stark's dead. Captain America like has this happy ending by living his life with Agent Carter in the past. Um, it's just a satisfying movie. It's not the best, but does bring a lot of really good closure. I can totally see why a lot of people are jumping ship. Like a lot of people who aren't like invested in superheroes overall, or a lot of like general audiences that might not be a big fan of superhero movies, but just really like the MCU, are jumping off at this point, and this is the time to jump off. If you're either this or Spider-Man Far From Home, because I know a lot of people that hate superheroes but love Spider-Man. My mom's one of them. Um, so I can see like them also going to see Spider-Man Far From Home, but beyond that, like with Black Panther 2, Doctor Strange 2, if you're watching those, then watch them because you just really like superheroes, and don't complain. Don't be like, oh, superhero fatigue, because if you're gonna complain about superhero fatigue, don't contribute to the superhero fatigue. Jump off here. This is a perfect spot to jump off. Um, but for me, like I love superheroes, and I think there's still a lot of ground to till, and I'm going to see Spider-Man Far From Home when it comes out. I'm going to see probably going to see Black Panther 2 if it looks interesting. Definitely will see Guardians of the Galaxy 3, especially if it has Thor in it, like this movie seems to be implying. Um, even if he's just like a cameo or bit part, or they like drop him off at the beginning and then he like just does his own thing, spins off from there. Uh, yeah, this is a perfect cap for Cap and Iron Man. And now we're getting into the top four. Any one of these can be number one, and they are all number one for very different reasons. But for the sake of this ranking, I have to pick some kind of order, and so I wanted to pick it based on two things. One is how well it holds up as its own movie, and also how well it utilizes the idea of the cinematic universe to build itself to much more than what it is on its own. Because of that, number four is Winter Soldier. Um, Now the goal gap in quality between Endgame and Winter Soldier is vast. Like I said, Winter Soldier can easily be number one if I just change the criteria a little bit to be more focused on like individual movies. This is the best true standalone movie Marvel has done by a wide margin. It's up there with like Dark Knight as one of the best written superhero movies ever made. Um, they really take that definitive version of Captain America from the first movie and really drag him through the mud, like really put him to the task. Um, it reminds me a bit of like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is one of my absolute favorite movies. Um, where you take this like really good idyllic character, drop him into a world of corruption, and then watch him work as like an antibody against that corruption. Uh, Captain America literally like red pills shield in in this movie after he finds out it's been corrupted, and the reveal with like the titular Winter Soldier Bucky Barnes, um, and how like Hydra has literally taken everything from Cap. He missed out on his life. He missed out on his girl. All his friends died, and his best friend, who he was willing to like die for, gets turned into a super assassin out to kill him, and it's heartbreaking. And Chris Evans really nails it. Uh, Scarlett Johansson is also No, this is the first movie where I said she was decent. Samuel Jackson gets a lot of fun action scene, or gets a fun action scene in this movie. I really like Robert Redford as Alexander Pierce. I think he's one of the more understated Marvel villains. Yeah, the action in this movie is it's just very grounded. It's the most grounded Marvel movie. Uh, and I know a lot of people that put it number one, and like I said, it could easily be number one if I were to change the criteria a little bit. Uh, what was number one for a long time on my list? The Avengers. Of these number one quality movies, this is the one that is kind of the opposite of Winter Soldier in that it's the least well written, the least tight, but it's also kind of unlike anything we had seen before. And even movies that do it better, like Civil War and Infinity War, which are the other two movies up next. Um, it kind of has that first factor. Like this was the first like real big multi-franchise crossover we had gotten since like the Universal Monsters in the 30s, and even then like the Universal Monsters all inhabited the same general genre of being monster movies, whereas this like you have this like action comedy espionage franchise with Iron Man, this pulpy 40s action franchise with Captain America, this more high fantasy action with Thor, and then Hulk being straight from a monster movie. And then like two characters that were straight from like James Bond films. One of them actually was from a Jason Bourne film. Hawkeye, Jeremy Renner, later on played in a Jason Bourne movie. Um, yeah, Loki is just really good. It's a fun ride. Not really much to say about it. It's just all fan. It's really a lot of fan service. I think it is Joss Whedon's best movie. Then again, that's not saying much because, like I said with Age of Ultron, I'm not a fan of his directing. Uh, but it just really works, and that's kind of amazing, and it really set the template for future movies like Age of Ultron, Endgame, and the next two movies on the next and last two movies on the list. Whew, number two and number one. I had to put. I wanted to put Civil War number one. On my Google Doc, it actually is. Um, but with Endgame in mind, I had to put Infinity War above it. And I'll get to why in a minute, but Civil War is the one I have seen the most. Um, it holds up. And the fact that it holds up after so many repeated viewings is kind of impressive on its own. They give a lot of really good characterizations to all the characters involved, and there's a lot of characters involved. And they do it without kind of like taking away from the fact that it is a Captain America movie. Like Captain America's role is still very much at the heart of this movie. His relationship with Bucky Barnes is the inciting incident of the conflict. His relationship with Iron Man is the conflict. Uh, his relationship with the Avengers is what creates his team. Uh, and kind of forces some other characters to work with Iron Man. That airport fight is really good and really creative, but for what I look for in a fight scene, that final fight between Iron Man, Winter Soldier, and Iron Man, Winter Soldier, and Captain America is even better. Um, Tom Holland's Spider Man and Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther are better here than they are in their own movie, and Vision and Scarlet Witch kind of get the short end of the stick. Well, actually, a couple characters get the short end of the stick. Vision especially, though, I think. I think they had to sideline him because he's so much more powerful than the other characters. They just kind of have a fight, you know. Scarlet Witch, and much like Black Panther, it's fair about that. Like, I'm just gonna read what I have note wise. Like, so this is from a script that I had planned for like kind of a short video on Civil War. This is the one I've seen the most, and yet still holds up. Civil War is a masterclass in why the MCU works. This, and to a lesser extent the Avengers trilogy, or quadrilogy now, could only exist in the machinations of the shared Marvel Universe. It pits the two most well-realized characters in a small personal philosophical debate that turns violent when the Winter Soldier gets caught in the crossfire. Tony Stark is desperately trying to maintain control after what happened in New York and is dealing with how his obsessive need for that control led to Ultron. Meanwhile, Steve Rogers is still on the same individual liberty path he set out on in Winter Soldier and is just trying to save his friend as that friend has regained his memories. Okay, I think we're back. Ah, yeah. If it's not one thing, it's another. Breaker blew, and it just like the entire house lost power, basically. Um. So yeah, I talked about Civil War and number one movie. I'm gonna wrap this up. Infinity War. Take everything I said about Civil War, multiply it. Um. Yeah. I got Thanos snapped out of here for about 10 minutes. Because it also took out my Wi-Fi router, so I wasn't even able to like. I had to flip the breaker, restart my computer, restart the Wi-Fi router. Now I'm monitoring the stream on my phone because I'm still opening up Google and stuff, so I can actually end the stream here in a few minutes. Um, yeah, for having as many characters as it does a really good job focusing on the ones that matter, giving everyone the screen time that they deserve in proportion to their relationship or dynamic with Thanos. Like, the ones who have the most screen time are the ones who are closest to Thanos. Like, Thanos has the most screen time. I think like Iron Man and Gamora have the next most screen time. They're the ones who get the most interactions with him and are the ones that like parallel him the most. And then like Thor. I know someone did like a list of like who gets what screen time. Despite having more characters than in game, technically, like I know in game technically has more characters, but they're all just bit parts at the end. Um, movie feels a lot more focused, and it feels like they hammered out a lot more of the details than they did in game, which is why this movie is just better. It's more satisfying. It's much more dramatic. Like the snap. Um, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. It has a lot funnier jokes. Like in game has funny jokes like America's ass, but this movie has like a take names and uh, take ass and kick names or whatever that line is. Uh, who, where's Gamora? I'll do you one better. Who is Gamora? I'll do you one better. Why is Gamora? We're in the in game now. Uh, Everything just coming to a head in this movie, and the hero's just in absolute react mode because this is Thanos's movie. Um, And yeah, it's kind of admirable that they were able to take like that same specialness of the first Avengers movie and then just like kick it up a few notches. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it a couple times now. It holds up. I have not seen it anywhere near as much as I've seen Civil War, but Civil War is also like 2 years older. Um, and I mean, both of them are on Netflix now, but Civil War was on Netflix back when I had Netflix. That's how I watched it so many times. Um, but yeah, everyone gets really, really good moments in this movie. Whereas in Endgame, everyone got like a moment, a cool moment. But here it's just like one awesome moment after another, like from beginning to end, non-stop. And it still manages to be so tight, still manages to get that downtime with Thanos. Uh, and like, Thanos is absolutely insane. Like, he is not a good guy. He is still a monster. But you kind of see where he's coming from because you believe that he believes his bullshit. Like, you don't need to sympathize with the villain for you to understand them. Like, Joker is a good example of this in The Dark Knight. Like, Joker is an absolute madman, and he is absolutely wrong. The whole point of that movie is proving the Joker wrong. But Joker believes Joker is right, and that's what makes him compelling, and Thanos has a lot of that going for him. As well as, like, his dynamic with Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Gamora, Star-Lord, Thor, to a lesser extent Captain America, who kind of gets sidelined, and that's maybe my biggest gripe with this movie, being a big Captain America fan. Wish you would have gotten a little bit more to do, or at least gotten the shield in this movie. It gets like these weird little pauldron things. Um, but yeah, this is the one Marvel movie I'd say is a 10 out of 10. Uh, the other ones like Winter Soldier, Avengers, and Civil War, I give a 9 out of 10. Endgame, I give like an 8 out of 10. This one it's the perfect climax to the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, this is the hypest it got for me. Endgame is pretty hype. Maybe it'll hold up better upon repeated viewings than Infinity War, but for right now, as it stands, as I'm streaming this on May 6th, 2019, it is 6 p.m. I'm streaming for about 2.5 hours total. Now, add another like 15 minutes to that for the break I took. Because the breaker blew. The breaker took a break for me. Yeah, and you got the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, that's gonna be it for me today. I'm gonna go and get a little something to eat, and then probably jump on Discord or get back to work on some other projects. So thank you for joining me, and thank you to the people who have put up with me, put up with the little breaks with my internet and my entire freaking power here. Um, what are your rankings for the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I'll put a poll. I think I'm gonna do a series of Twitter polls. Like, Twitter polls only allow for 4 options, so I might put it in kind of like tiers, like which is the best of these moves, which is the best of these moves, which is the best of these, and so on and so forth. Try to like do a bit of a ranking thing that way, or just let me know in the comments below, or just I know there's that tier list maker now that's online. It's actually a really cool thing to do. I wish a couple of the tiers that I'm interested in were a little more like fleshed out. Like, there's a presidential tier list I want to do on that website, but all the ones I found have like, they don't have the names, and they just have like the faces, and then they have repeats. Like, they have like 4 Obamas because they're dumb. Yeah, I have my list that's on Twitter. Yeah, so until next time, until next stream or next video, I'm Mediocrity4. Thanks for watching.